Hello, I'm Dr. William H. Myers, Professor of New Testament and Black Church Studies at Ashland Theological Seminary in Ohio and Senior Pastor of the New Mount Zion Baptist Church in Cleveland. I come today with the fourth and final part of a series on the goodness of God. And today, I want to talk about the goodness of God and selected biblical characters. The first one is Abel. According to the Bible, the first child born on the earth to Adam and Eve. I want to talk about him as a character in terms of goodness that is generosity toward God. Abel, it is said, was like he worked with the field, with growing things. No, not with growing things. That's his brother Cain. But Abel, I guess you could say both of them were like farmers, but Abel was more with animals. Cain was more with growing things. But about Abel now, the difference in him and his brother is the generosity that he had towards God, given what God did for him. Unlike Cain, Abel brought the best and the first of what he had received from God. He brought the best and the first of that to give back to God. That speaks of his goodness back to God, given the goodness that God had shown him. You know, this is the most difficult thing for people when it comes to God. Even for Christians. There are many, many Christians. You cannot convince them that they ought to give of their best to God. And look at this. Let's talk about what's best. Because God only asks for 10%. Really, the best is the 90. He lets us keep 90. He just asks us to give 10%. There are so many people that don't want to give God nothing. They want to give him the last, the least, the leftover. And this is the most difficult conversion part for people who say that they are disciples and followers of Jesus. God gave us his best. Jesus gave us his best, his life. But that goodness of God to give us his best and just to accept this little leftover that we want to give him. Why not try as Abel did, not as Cain did? Why not try as Abel did? To give God some of the best of what you've received from him. That's a good lesson I think we get from Abel. Abraham, referred to as the father of the faithful, he demonstrates for us, in return for the goodness of God, he has a faith in God, a trust in God to give over to God and be obedient to God in everything that he does. Trusted God when he didn't know where God was taking him, where he was going. trusted God in the offering up of his son when he did not know whether he was going to get another one or whether that son would be saved. Trusted God to go to a land where he would never fully occupy but live in tents on that land. God's promise to him that his seed would grow and would outnumber the stars and the sands on the sea. This is just a promise. But he believed God. And the goodness of God delivered him everything that God promised him. The faith of Abraham expressed his goodness towards God. There's Moses. The goodness and the character of Moses we see expressed in his perseverance. The goodness of God towards Moses was to trust him to deliver his people from Egypt and to lead them to the promised land. Now, that was a difficult task. That was people that he was leaving who were used to being slaves, and they did not know how to live free. And many of them wanted to go back. They gave Moses so much trouble out there. Moses had led them out of slavery. And then they were out there and they won't. You led us out here to starve and not have water. And Moses went through that and God fulfilled that. Pharaoh was coming after him. And you led us out here to be just slaughtered and we might as well stay in Egypt. What a difficult people. Then Moses had to leave. Some would have just given up and say, all right, go ahead, go on your own. Out there, wanting to build idol gods like they saw in Egypt. I mean, just so much Moses had to go. But he persisted to lead them from Egypt to the door of the promised land. Now, some will say that Moses didn't make it in because he did let them lead him to making one mistake where he got angry. God told him to speak to the rock, and he struck the rock and drowned some of the people. And that was why he didn't go in. I'm not sure that that's the case. We see that in the movies, Ten Commandments. But I don't see that anywhere. It may just be that Moses' call was to get the children of Israel from Egypt to the door of the promised land. That was his job, and his job was done. It was Joshua's job to carry him over. Moses persisted in doing that job. That's the goodness that we see in the character of Moses. What about Esther? Somebody that would risk their life for another. That's the goodness of Jesus, who laid down his life for others. Esther says, I will go before the king, even when I'm not summoned, that I might be beheaded for doing that. Yeah, you get your hair cut off going before the king, and the king hadn't called you. Even if you were the wife of the king, you wait for the king to call you. But this plot against her people, on behalf of her people, she went before the king and pleaded their cause at the risk of her life. That we see in the character of Esther, the goodness of Esther. We've seen others. We've seen that as black people. And Martin Luther King, who gave his life to the fight with America and in the face of wicked leaders and in the face of a hateful nation to give his life for others. Esther is an example of that as well. There's two rather good kings in the history of Israel, for sure. David and Solomon, I put them together as a package. David, the man who was a man after God's own heart. Solomon, the wisest king that ever lived. Both always trying to do the right thing. Not perfect, but hearts after God, to do what was right in the sight of God, in leading a nation, in leading people. How many politicians do we see, leaders, presidents, prime ministers, whatever their titles, that's more for themselves than they are for the people? Oh, we see that righteousness in the characters of David and Solomon, to lead their people in the ways of God. What a wonderful characteristic of responding to the goodness of God by trying to be good yourself. When we go over to the New Testament, I like somebody like Peter. Peter just seems to be, to me, that down-to-earth kind of character that wants to do the right thing and wants to follow Jesus the right way. That persistent characteristic of Peter. Flawed, but committed. Flawed, but obedient. And yeah, he sticks his foot in his mouth at times. He speaks when he shouldn't. He acts when he shouldn't. Things contrary to what Jesus has been teaching him, but he is loyal. And his commitment to Jesus. And yes, he deserts at the end, but at the end, he also turns back. And there's a legend about Peter. It says when he was being led out to be crucified, he said, please don't turn me right side up. I'm not worthy to be crucified like my Lord. Turned me upside down. That loyalty to Jesus to the end. And then there's Paul. That one, though he says, I am not worthy to be an apostle, but God saw something in me to set me aside. Again, he's not perfect. But when he turns from being a persecutor and a prosecutor against the way, against the followers of Jesus, when he turns, after having met Jesus for himself, he is faithful to the end. I have fought the good fight. I have kept the faith. I have poured out my life for the cause. I finished my race. When he turned, he was 100% committed and would not yield on the truth of the gospel. He was committed to that gospel like no other. And of course, the final character is Jesus himself. He is the essential, the quintessential character of the goodness of God. For he is good. He is love. He is mercy. He is compassion. He is goodness. It's found in what he did on the cross. The forgiveness that he offered even those who crucified him. The obedience to his Father to never relinquish on the call that was on his life. All of these characters and many others characters in the Bible could be called forth in various ways as to things that they did to respond to the goodness of God in their own way. What about you? Who's some of your favorite characters? And why are they favorite? What characteristic in them do you find as a characteristic that is in response to the goodness of God? Seek out your own. What it is and how it is you want to respond to the goodness of God. I hope that this has been a helpful, inspiring, invigorating series on the goodness of God that in some way helps you to live out your life in the goodness of God, and also to respond in that way towards others. We close this with this song. Here again, this song on the goodness of God. And may you be blessed by it and by this series. Stay tuned. We have a new series coming every month. Released on Saturdays, 4 series if it's a 4 Saturday month, 5 parts if it's a 5 Saturday month. I hope you enjoy them, and I hope they help.